Whatever the return that is coming, so it is assumed that it is constant. When the dividend payout ratio is 60%, the retention ratio will be 40%, that is your 0.40. When the dividend payout ratio is 50%, retention ratio will also be 50%. So whatever the dividend payout ratio they follow, it has an effect on the market price of the share. Hello everybody, I'm Divya ma'am, Assistant Professor from Department of Commerce and Management, lecturing Vidhyaashram First Grade College, MYSURU, the Temple of Excellence. It's a warm welcome to you all for the session 2 on your chapter on your Unit 3 Dividend Decision. Moving forward, Dividend Decision, the concepts and the problem, we will discuss on Gordon's model in today's class. Moving forward, so let us understand what is Gordon's model is all about. So as I have told you, there are two theories that has been given, relevance theory and irrelevance theory. So we have discussed about the relevance theory, that is your Walter's model, the another relevance theory with respect to the value of the firm and the dividend decision, that is your Gordon's model. So what does this Gordon model says? It also explains about the dividend policy. Whatever the firm takes, it affects the value of the firm. So it has a direct impact on the firm. So whatever the dividend payout ratio they follow, it has an effect on the market price of the share. So let us look into the Gordon's model and understand in a better way. So all the models or whatever theories the experts give will be based on certain assumptions. So they assume and they derive the theory, and from that theory they give out the formula, and with the help of that formula we have to solve the problem. So let us look into what is Gordon's model is all about. So according to him, dividend policies are relevant and affect the value of the share and the firm. So it has a direct impact on the value of the firm. Whatever the dividend policy they take up, that has a direct impact on the value of the firm, the price of the market price of the particular share. So the following assumptions are used under this model. So as I have told you, the experts provides the theories, so that theories will be based on certain assumptions. So now let us look in what are the different assumptions that we have. The first assumption is the firm is a equity firm and no external finance is used. The first assumption is what? The firm is using only one source of capital, one source of finance, that is equity finance. So it is only using equity in its firm, so no other external finances being used. The ratio of return on the firm investment is constant. So whatever the return that is coming, so it is assumed that it is constant. The next is cost of equity is greater than retention ratio. So your cost of equity is greater than the retention ratio. So we have here, that is B. What is this B indicates? It is nothing but the retention ratio. So your cost of capital or equity capitalization rate or capitalization rate, so all this is one and the same. So your equity capitalization rate or the cost of capital is always greater than the retention rate. Next assumption is the retention ratio is always constant. The firm has a long life. So based on the following assumptions, so Gordon has given a formula, and based on that formula we will calculate the market price of the share. So what is the market price of the share? So we will discuss. And what is the formula given? The formula is P is equal to earnings 1 minus B is your what? Your dividend payout ratio divided by cost of equity or capitalization rate minus B. What B stands for? B is nothing but your retention ratio into R. What is R stands for? Ratio of return or internal rate of return. So I will repeat. So kindly note down the formula very carefully. So what does E stands for? E stands for earnings. 1 minus B is nothing but your dividend payout ratio. So what does this B stands for? B is nothing but the retention ratio, and capitalization rate minus we have B into R. So what is the B? That is retention ratio into the rate of return. So this is what your formula is. So based on this formula, we'll be solving the problem. So what we have to compute? We have to calculate the market price. So when the capitalization rate is given and when the retention ratio or dividend payout ratio is given, what is the price of the share? What is the market price of the share? What is the value of the firm? So that we have to calculate. So moving forward, so let us take up the problem and understand in the better way. In the last class, we have discussed about 15 marks problem, that is your Walters model. In today's class, we are discussing Gordon's model. This also will be asked in your examination, which is very important for you all. So Gordon's model, the problem, let us look into the question. So, the following details are available in respect of firm where the rate of return is 12%. So, what is R is given in the question? The rate of return is how much? 0.12. Since it's a 12%, we are converting into the decimal 0.12. And the earning per share is rupees 50. What is given next? Earnings is given. Using Gordon's model, determine the value of share. So what we have to find out? The value of the share, the price of the share. We have to compute that using the following assumptions. What are the table given in the question? So let us look into what is the table. Dividend payout ratio is given. So they have given what? Dividend payout ratio, but we don't know what is retention ratio. Dividend payout ratio is 10. So let us assume 100 rupees is the profit we have got. So if we are issuing 10% dividend, what will be the remaining amount? 90%, or 90 rupees will be what? Your retention ratio. So dividend payout ratio is 10 rupees. We are assuming profit or return as 100 rupees. In that 100 rupees, the dividend payout ratio. What is the dividend payout ratio? That is 10%. So in 100 rupees, 10% is the dividend payout ratio. Remaining 90% is what? Your retention ratio. So this is how you calculate. In few of the questions, they'll directly give you all the retention ratio. You have to then take up the retention ratio percentage. So this will be 0.90. So 90%, 0.90. You have to convert into decimal. So in few of the questions, they'll give you the direct retention ratio. So you can take up the direct retention ratio into the formula and calculate the value. But in this case, in the problem, they have given the dividend payout ratio. So you have to calculate the retention ratio by yourself and then have to compute the value. Moving forward, 100%, 90 is the retention ratio, 20%, 80 will be the retention ratio. Assume 100 rupees minus 30, 70% will be the retention ratio. 100 minus 40%, 60% will be the retention ratio. 100 minus 50%, it is 50% is the retention ratio. 100 minus 60%, it is 40% is the retention ratio. 70%, meanwhile it is 30%. And for each thing, the capitalization rate is given. For each cases, capitalization is different. It is not the same. So you need to calculate the capitalization rate. But the return is, the rate of return, R is only 1% given, that is 12% is given, but your cost of equity is different for all the cases. So for all the cases, you need to take up the different cost of equity, that is your capitalization rate, and solve the problem. So let us look into the formula and compute the problem. Moving forward, formula, earnings 1 minus B, that is your retention ratio, divided by equity capitalization rate minus retention ratio into rate of return. So the rate of return is how much here for all the cases? It is 0.12% because it is 12% for all the cases. And what is the, when dividend payout ratio, that is 10%, your retention ratio will be 90%. So 0.90. So we have taken. So let's substitute the values. So when the R is given, earnings is what? Earnings is rupees 20. We have taken rupees 20. 1 minus retention ratio. When the dividend payout ratio is 10%, what will be the retention ratio? That is 90%. Convert into decimal, it is 0.90. So 0.90. So divided by equity capitalization rate. So what is equity capitalization rate for the first case? 0.20. Since it's in the percentage, we are converting into decimal. So 0.20 minus your retention ratio into internal rate of return. The answer you get is how much? 21.74. Similarly, we are doing for the second case, that is your 20% dividend payout ratio. If the 20% dividend payout ratio, your retention ratio will be how much? 80%. Convert it into decimal, 0.80. Here, your cost of capital or equity capitalization rate is 0.19. 0.19, we are substituting the value. So 20 is the earnings, 1 minus retention ratio, that is your 0.19 is what? Your 0.19 is the capitalization rate, retention ratio into return. The value you get, the answer you get, the market price per share is how much? 42.55. Similarly, we are doing it for when the dividend payout ratio is 30%, your retention ratio will be 70%, that is your 0.70. Same return, that is your 12% return, but the equity capitalization rate is how much? Equity capitalization is 18%, 0.18. We are putting the values, we are substituting all the values. When you solve the problem, the answer you get is how much? 62.5. Next is when the retention ratio is 0.60 and the return is how much? 12%. The equity capitalization is different. What is it? 0.17. So we are taking 0.17 earnings retention ratio into rate of return. The answer you get is how much? If you substitute all the values into your calculator, you'll get the answer as what? 81.63. Next, we have to do similarly for 50%. So if it is 50% dividend payout ratio, 50% will be your retention ratio. What will be the cost of capital? It is 16%, 0.16. So let us take that 0.16. That is your what? Equity capitalization rate or capitalization rate. So earnings 1 minus retention ratio, capitalization rate minus 0.50 is what? Your retention ratio into the rate of return. If you substitute all the values to the formula, you'll get as 100. So how do you calculate this? How do you put into your calculator? First, 1 minus 0.50, it will be 0.50. If you multiply with 20, you'll get the answer. Divided by 0.50 into 0.12. With that answer, you subtract 0.16, you'll get the answer as 100. So 10 you'll get, and divided by 0.01, you'll get the answer as 100. Moving forward, we are calculating for 60%. What is that 60%? It is nothing but your dividend payout ratio. When the dividend payout ratio is 60%, the retention ratio will be 40%, that is your 0.40. The rate of return is same, that is 12%. Earnings is same, but the cost of capital is 15%. So 0.15. So let's substitute all the values to the formula and check out the answer. So what is that? 20 is the earnings. 1 minus your retention ratio, your capitalization rate minus retention ratio into rate of return. The answer you get is 12 divided by 0.12, and if you substitute the value, the price of the share you get is 117.65. Moving forward, similarly, the 70% is the dividend payout ratio. If it is 70% dividend, 30% will be your retention ratio. So that retention ratio we have taken 30%, that is 0.30, and your rate of return remains the same, but the cost of capital is how much? Cost of capital is 14%, 0.14. So let us substitute 0.14. Similarly, all the ways, if you substitute the value, you get 14 divided by 0.104, and the answer you get is 134.61. So this is how you calculate your problem market price per share by using Gordon's model. So let us take up one more problem for more clarification on your Gordon's model. Moving forward, problem 2. So read out the questions carefully, because as I have told you, in few of the questions directly retention ratios will be given. In few of the questions they'll give you dividend payout ratio. When dividend payout ratio is given, you need to calculate the retention ratio. So as we have done in the last problem, that is assuming the return as 100%, we have taken the values, subtracted from the dividend payout ratio, you will get the retention ratio. So let us read out the questions carefully. Following information is available in respect of 3 firms: S firm, N firm, G firm is given. The return is different: 12%, 11%, 8%, and the cost of capital same for all the problems. So 11%, 11%, 11% for all the 3 cases, and your earnings is also same for all the 3 cases, that is ₹20 for all the cases. And calculate the effect of dividend payout ratio using Gordon's model if the dividend payout ratio is 10%, 30%, 50% and 70%. So in the question also they have given what? In this particular question also they have given the dividend payout ratio. Retention ratio directly they have not given. So we need to calculate the retention ratio. So let us calculate. If the dividend payout ratio is 10%, your retention ratio will be 90%, that is 0.90. And when the dividend payout ratio is 30%, it is 70%, that is 0.70. Next, 50%, it is 50% only, 0.50. Next, we have 70%, 100 minus 70, it is how many percent? It is 30%. So retention ratio will be what? 0.30. So this is your answer. So this is your retention ratio. Based on this, we need to calculate because the rate is different here. So when the rate of return is 12%, when the dividend payout ratio 10%, 30%, 50% and 70%, what is the market price? We need to calculate using Gordon's model. Moving forward, S firm, we are taking case 1, S firm. So when the return is how many percent? When the return is 12%. First case we are taking when the return is 12%, dividend payout ratio is 30%, 10%, 50% and 70%. So that we need to calculate now for the S firm. So S firm, when the rate of return, that is your return R is 12%, we are calculating the retention ratio. That is your retention ratio is, if it is 10% dividend payout ratio, retention ratio will be how much? 90%. So 0.90. 20 is the earning per share. So what is the earning per share? 20 rupees is the earning per share. 1 minus 0.90 is the retention ratio, divided by your capitalization rate is 11%. So 0.11 minus retention ratio into rate of return. The answer you get is 1000. Next, for the 30% dividend payout ratio, 30% of dividend payout ratio, it will be 70%, 0.70 with the same return. If you substitute the value, you get the answer as 230.77. Moving forward, 50% dividend payout ratio, and if it is 50% dividend payout ratio, your retention ratio will also be how much? It is also 50%. So 50% with the same internal rate of return, if you substitute the value into your calculator, the answer you get is 200. Moving forward, we are doing it for 70%. 70% if it is the dividend payout ratio, 30% will be what? Your retention ratio with the same equity capitalization rate and the rate of return. The answer you get is how much? 189.19. So for 10%, 30%, 50% and 70%. So this is the market price per share as per the Walton model. So we have calculated for the Yes Limited. Now we need to calculate for 11%. This is rate of return is how much? 0.12, and this we have calculated. Now we need to calculate for firm N, and for firm N the rate of return is 11%. So what we have to take for firm N? 11% is the rate of return we need to take. So firm N, 10% dividend payout ratio, 90% will be the retention ratio, and the R is 11% with the same equity capitalization rate. The answer you get is how much? So you get is 181.82. Moving forward, 30% dividend payout ratio, the 70% will be the retention ratio, and your return R is 0.11. If you substitute the value, you get 6 divided by 0.33. The answer again is 181.82. And again 50% dividend payout ratio. When the dividend payout ratio 50%, retention ratio will also be 50%. Rate of return is 11%, 0.11 with the same capitalization rate. Let's substitute the value. So the answer you get is 10 divided by 0.55. If you substitute the value, again you get the answer as 181.82. Moving forward, 70% dividend payout ratio. If you do it again, 30% will be the retention ratio. The rate is 0.11. That is your for N Limited. The rate of return is 11%, 0.11. And if you substitute the value into the formula, you get 14 divided by 0.077. The answer you get, the market price is 181.82 is the same market price we have got for all the particular cases. Moving forward, for firm G, we are taking up case G. So now let us look into what is the R. So what is R in the question given? R is 8%. So now we have to take 8% as the rate of return. R is how much? 8%. So it is 0.08. It is the rate of return we have got. So everything is similar as we have taken. Only the changes that we have is the return we are taking it 0.08. So in the first case we have taken 12%. In the second case we have taken how many percent? 11%. In the third case, we are taking 8%. So 0.08. If you substitute for all the cases, that is dividend payout ratio is 10%, dividend payout ratio is 30%, and the dividend payout ratio is 50%, and the last is dividend payout ratio is 70%. The answer you get is the similar 130. So this is the answer you get firm N and firm G. So moving forward, let us take one more problem. Similar problem for your better understanding. So let us read out the question. Following is the information available in respect of 3 companies, particulars A company, B company and C company. Rate of return, for it is similar for 2 cases, A and C company, but it is different for B case. And cost of equity rate 10%, earnings per share 20 rupees. So 20 rupees, and your equity capitalization rate, your cost of capital or capitalization, it is one and the same. So all this is set for your cost of capital. It is one and the same. So cost of equity rate is similar for all the 3 companies, A company, B company and your C company. And find out the effect of dividend payout in the price of equity share under Gordon's model when the dividend payout ratio is 30%, 50%, 75% and 100%. So in this case also, my dear students, they have given dividend payout ratio. Directly you need to calculate the retention ratio. So you all know that how to calculate now. So how to calculate? 100 minus 30%. So 100% minus 30%, how much it is? 70%. So 0.70 is your retention ratio. 50% will be your retention ratio, that is 0.50. Next it is 75%. So your retention ratio will be how much? 25%, 0.25. Moving forward, 100%. So 100% is the dividend payout ratio, then your retention ratio will be 0. So 0.70, 0.50, 0.25, 0 is your retention ratio. So we have calculated. So this value only will substitute to the formula. The only changes we have is the rate of return. So first case, A Limited, when the company rate of return is 15%, that is 0.15, then what is the effect on the dividend payout ratio and what is the market price? We need to check as per the Gordon's model. What is the formula? My dear students, formula is P is equal to earnings 1 minus B divided by your equity capitalization rate minus B into R, retention ratio into rate of return. So only the rate of return varies. So when the rate of return is how much? When the rate of return is 15%, the dividend payout ratio 30%, 50%, 75% and 100%. What is the changes that we can see? So 20 rupees is the earnings, that is we have taken. 1 minus B, your retention ratio as we have calculated here, 70, 0.70. Next we have taken your equity capitalization rate, that is 10% for all the cases. 10% we have taken. Again the retention ratio into the rate of return. If you substitute the value, that is your answer, you'll get 1200. So all the substitution is very easy as we have learnt in the previous problems. Next we have 50%, the same rate of return. The values, if you substitute, the answer you get is 400. And similarly 75% retention ratio will be how much? 0.25. 0.25 if you calculate the cost of capitalization rate and the rate of return is how much? 15%. The answer you get is how much? 240. That is the market price per share. Moving forward, 100%. 0 will be the retention ratio because in this case the company is issuing 100% dividend. So they are issuing the 100% dividend. That's why the retention ratio is nil, 0 in this particular case. So the answer if you substitute the values into the calculator, you get 200 as an answer. Moving forward, now we have to calculate for case B when the rate of return is 18%. So what is the case? Rate of return is 18%. Rest of the information is similar. Everything we have calculated. Only the rate of return is 18%. That is your 0.18. If you convert that percentage into decimal, 0.18, substitute the values and check out the answer. Moving forward, next we have the rate of return is how much? 15% again. Here in this case, let us change because 15%, the answer what you have got here, it will be similar. So for your knowledge, for your understanding in a better way, let us change the rate of return into 8%. So what is this 8%? So 8% is your rate of return. So we have taken return as 0.08, the rate of return. So similarly, check out the answers by doing it. The rest of the calculations are very similar to the problem. So check it by yourself and know your answers. That's it for today's class. Hope the session was interesting, fruitful, and whatever the class we have learned, it was helpful for you people in learning Gordon's model. So thank you so much for joining for today's class. Smile is the biggest jewel you can wear. Keep smiling, people. Thank you.